What's up, everybody, and welcome to Block and Build, a podcast from Convergence Magazine. I'm your host and the publisher of Convergence, Caden Mock. On this show, we're building a roadmap for the movement that's working to block the impacts of rising authoritarianism while building the strength and resilience of the broad front that we need to win. This week on the show, we're going to take a closer look at the case of journalist Mario Guevara, who's been in ICE detention since mid-June, despite being in the country legally and all the criminal charges against him being thrown out. I'll talk with Atlanta area freelance reporter Sam Barnes to learn a little more. Then we're going to take a broader look at the escalating normalization of state violence and the erosion of civil liberties that's being enacted by the Trump administration's deportation programs and more. I'm joined by the International Associate General Secretary for the American Friends Service Committee, or AFSC, Kerri Kennedy. But first, of course, these headlines. To start out, I just want to talk a little bit more about Proposition 50, the Election Rigging Response Act here in California. I just want to thank the comrades who turned my ear over the past couple weeks about their perspectives on this. I'm just going to basically directly quote what one of them said to me. "We will not win a wrestling match against MAGA with our hands tied behind our back." The fact of the matter is, without countering the far right's move to further consolidate power in the legislative branch, there won't be an opening to push for a longer-term prize like proportional representation. Unfortunately, we live in the shadow of the long list of efforts by both states and the courts to completely gut any previous work to make elections in this country free and fair. While I don't love the idea of a gerrymandering arms race, I like less the idea of conceding territory to people who celebrated when SCOTUS gutted the Voting Rights Act. Those of us in the movement can and should keep our eyes on that bigger prize, like, for example, proportional representation. But realistically, the road to winning that prize goes right through efforts like Prop 50. And it is virtually impossible to get through this week without talking about the Charlie Kirk of it all. To start out, let's be clear. Charlie Kirk was a white Christian nationalist demagogue who advocated for violence against women, trans people, gay people, people of color, you name it. He was glib about the shooting deaths of children in school shootings. He paid for buses to take rioters to the Capitol on January 6th. His organization, Turning Point USA, was a machine that turned right-wing billionaire money into thousands of young foot soldiers for MAGA. He was a media impresario who delighted in turning the temperature up on the so-called culture wars, sometimes by going after individuals online who his millions of followers would then dox, harass, and inundate with death and rape threats. So Ezra Klein can miss me with the redemptionist claim that Kirk was somehow doing politics the, quote, right way. Speaking of the mainstream media response, it's been unsurprising, but no less agonizing, to watch mainstream media outlets credibly repeating the wild speculation about identity and motivation of the shooter before we knew literally anything this week. It's never been more clear how desperate so many of them are to manufacture consent for the hard right turn in our political culture. It's been frankly baffling to me to watch the level of empathy, a harmful quote-unquote new age term by Kirk's own telling, from pundits and politicians regardless of their stated ideology or political party for an incendiary podcaster. Trump ordering the flag to be flown at half-mast for Kirk when we barely heard a word from him after Minnesota Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband were assassinated in their home makes my head hurt. The political scientist Corey Robin posted this morning relating the rush to rehabilitate Kirk and blame any of his supposed enemies to the post-Reconstruction movement to redeem the Confederacy. Like the politicians and pundits calling Kirk a hero, the redemptionists bent over backwards to lionize Confederate politicians and generals. They worked to rehabilitate the lost cause, giving white supremacy and chattel slavery the genteel veneer our pop culture often still associates with the antebellum South. It was an effort to blame the Union, the federal government, abolitionists, and Reconstruction itself as a violent imposition on white Southern culture. And a lot of it worked. So perhaps it isn't surprising that a real rogues gallery of right-wing assholes have called for all-out war against trans people or the left or whatever they gleaned from that wild speculation that serves their purposes. While the administration will likely focus on the alleged shooter's use of the word fascist, we learned this morning that he was probably just an extremely online nihilist who inscribed memes, typically siloed off in far-right online cesspools, onto the ammunition for his rifle. The bigger picture, painted by the range of references reported out, indicates the alleged shooter was a gamer who probably spent way too much time on 4chan. Kirk's death is yet another harbinger of the dangerous moment that we're in. The whole episode gives me a terrible feeling in the pit of my stomach, from the rush to blame people who are already in Trump's crosshairs to FBI Director Kash Patel quoting the Christchurch Shooters Manifesto in his press conference this morning. If you've got the terrible feeling too, all I can really say right now is you're not alone. Oh, and shout out to Brazil. Jair Bolsonaro got convicted of attempting a coup and will have to sit with the consequences for up to 27 years in prison. That's what you do when an authoritarian clown attempts a coup. Take notes, America.
Hey everybody, this is Maurice Mitchell, National Director of the Working Families Party. I read and give to Convergence because it has become a home for me to engage in critical analysis, find practical advice for organizing and strategy, and inspiration in the belief that a better world is not only possible, we can build it.
To make either a one-time donation or become a sustaining member, visit convergencemag.com/donate. You can find a direct link in the show notes. Thanks for listening.
All right, for our first segment, as you probably know if you've listened to this podcast, we've been headlining some of the details on the case of Mario Guevara, an Atlanta area independent journalist with a huge following in the region thanks to his Spanish language reporting. He was detained by ICE on June 14th while he was covering a No Kings protest, and he remains in detention to this day. I'm joined now by reporter Sam Barnes, who has covered the details of Guevara's case for the Georgia Recorder. They are here to help us better understand the details of Guevara's detention, as well as how ICE, the courts, and the county sheriff's offices in the area are working together to handle the case. Have a listen. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here to talk about this horrifying, important case.
Could you tell us a little bit about who Mario is? You know, we've talked about his case a little on the show. Is he somebody that you know from working as a reporter in the Atlanta area? And what kind of work is he known for?
Mario Guevara is a reporter who primarily reports in Spanish, typically using social media as his primary publishing platform. He has lived and worked and has a family in the United States for the past 20 years. He was originally from El Salvador, where he did work as a journalist, and he fled the country due to political violence because of his work as a journalist. He is an extremely popular and well-known journalist in Spanish-speaking communities. At the time of his arrest, which he actually live streamed through on his Facebook platform, I've been told that that video had 1 million viewers at the moment of his arrest. Last time I checked, his Facebook page had just over 800,000 followers. Like, he is incredibly popular. Probably what Mario is most well known for is his live streaming coverage of police activity in Georgia, particularly of ICE raids. He's been doing this for pretty much his entire career. He's been reporting on the effects of immigration activity and police activity in the Spanish-speaking and immigrant communities in Metro Atlanta. Especially in the past, a lot of his work has involved doing ride-alongs with police, something that he's pretty routinely criticized for in communities. He is an admirer of the police. He has numerous videos on his social media of him talking with, they're usually called like Hispanic outreach officers in police departments, like talking about, ironically now, hey, we're here to keep communities safe. We're not the ones in charge of, such and such police department. We don't care about your immigration status. We care about the crime you witnessed or the crime that happened to you. We want to keep you safe. And it's that sort of community outreach and live streaming from scenes of police activity that he is most well known for.
Yeah, it's sort of like an interesting, I don't know. It seems like part of like these sort of like grassroots local journalism beats that like get lots of viewers, but it does seem very ironic now in kind of a sick way. So we know that Mario was arrested as he was covering the No Kings Day rally on June 14th, but the reporting that you've done has also shown that, like, even though most of the folks who were sort of like caught up in that were released and that the charges were dropped, he remains in detention. Can you walk us through a little bit, like, what the evolution of his case has been since the day of the protest?
Can I reframe your comment
Sure.
a little bit? So personally speaking, like, I reject any kind of dichotomy between an independent or self-taught journalist and one that went to J school or something. That said, Mario has been a professional journalist for most of his working life. He's won Emmys. He's been nominated for multiple news Emmys. Before he founded his own outlet in 2024, he worked for Mundo Hispanico, which is one of the biggest news outlets, Spanish language news outlets, at least in Georgia. I know it does have national reach too. He's been profiled in the New York Times. He has written op-eds for the New York Times. I think, especially in the context of his initial arrest at the anti-ICE protest on No King's Day, there was an initial perception by the police that he was just some guy with a camera. And while that person does not deserve to be arrested any more than a professional journalist, Mario is very, very dedicated to his craft and his profession. So to go back to why Mario remains in custody, there's two answers for that. One is pretty clear vendetta by local police, local sheriff's office, and ICE. The underlying reason as to why those agencies were allowed to use that vendetta to keep him in jail is a Georgia immigration law passed in 2024. It's a very complicated law that's very controversial, has largely not been tested in court. So a lot of the legally wishy-washy stuff in the bill, the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Office in particular, which is the county that sort of ICE used to help justify detaining Mario, has kind of used this legal uncertainty around the immigration law. Primarily, he's still detained because local and the federal government want him to be, right? So Mario got arrested at the protest in DeKalb County on misdemeanor charges that are extremely common for protesters to get charged with. Misdemeanor obstruction, walking in the roadway, and all of these charges have since been dropped. But unlike someone who is white like me or doesn't look Hispanic, Georgia law requires jailers, sheriffs, whoever is running a jail, to investigate the immigration status of anyone they think might be an immigrant or might be not a citizen or might not be white.
And this is House Bill 1105.
1105.
Yeah.
It also requires a jail to hold a person for ICE. If ICE says, hey, I heard you have this person in your jail, I want them. And the law is also very vague, legally untested, and was not even popular with like the Sheriff's Association in Georgia, because I think the way they put it was it's poorly written and doesn't do what you want it to do. So what 1105 creates is a situation where, in Mario's case, he was granted bond. He was granted a no cash bond, like just we call it a signature bond, unsecured judicial release. You promise to show up for your eventual court date and you're free to go. He was granted that bond, but ICE had already said, we want you to hold this person for 48 hours so we can pick them up. And it was that very specific legal concurrence of events that allowed Mario to be transferred from the DeKalb County Jail into eventually ICE custody. And it's that moment where he was in the jail, ICE was notified of his arrest, that it seems a plan may have begun to emerge between Gwinnett County Sheriff's Office and ICE to do whatever they could to keep Mario detained.
Yeah, and could you talk a little bit more about what you've uncovered about the potential collaboration between the sheriff's offices and ICE, and a little bit more about why the sheriff's offices might be motivated to keep Guevara in custody?
Gwinnett County is one of the most diverse countries in the nation. It is the most diverse county in Georgia. So issues that affect immigrants and policing show up tenfold in Gwinnett County. So given that Mario covers stories that affect immigrant communities, a lot of his work is in Gwinnett County. What many people suspect happened is that ICE, knowing that Mario is in the country legally, and again, this is all supposition, somehow or another, Gwinnett County got the idea in their heads that what they should do is provide ICE with or what they believe to be damning information about Mario.
I guess I'm very interested in knowing a little bit about like this sort of like interagency cooperation and like does it seem exceptional, different?
Yes. Well, it's very clear that what happened is that the Gwinnett County and the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Office and ICE worked together to just do whatever they could to keep Mario detained. Especially because in immigration court, it's sort of like you're guilty until proven innocent. You're allowed to use hearsay. It's up to the person facing immigration charges to disprove that. So it seems that what happened is that Gwinnett County got together with ICE, and we really don't know how Gwinnett County and ICE came together on this, but we have the evidence through open records that they did to just try and trump up additional criminal charges against Mario. Because while he was still in the DeKalb County Jail just before his transfer to ICE, all of a sudden warrants came down for Mario in Gwinnett County. And we're asking ourselves, how could he possibly be charged with a new crime in Gwinnett County when he's been in the DeKalb County Jail for 4 or 5 days?
Right. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, it sure didn't. And eventually we finally got copies of the warrants. And these warrants were for traffic charges that Mario allegedly committed a month prior to the charges being taken out. The charges were taken out on June 17th or 18th, and the traffic violations were allegedly committed on May 13th and May 20th.
Yeah, so that's pretty suspicious.
But what accompanied these traffic charges was an ICE agent emailing the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Office and saying, hey, Mario's got a bond hearing on July 1st. Could I get a copy of those warrants? Just, I already know about the warrants, but could you just send me the paper copy of them? And while we're at it, do you have any information that I could use to fight Mario's bond? To keep him detained? To make him sound like a really bad guy? And sure enough, Gwinnett County did. As far as I can tell, at ICE's request, Gwinnett County put together this very detailed, lengthy narrative report detailing interactions it had allegedly, supposedly, it seems, had with Mario dating back to February 2025, February of this year. It is this very, very dense detailing these 6 or 7 instances where Mario was out reporting, where Mario had gotten a tip from one of those loyal viewers that, hey, there's a lot of police in this area. I think it might be ICE. So Mario went to these scenes, and according to the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Office, those scenes that Mario attended to report on were not immigration raids. They were actually operations by gang units or joint operations with the DEA. According to the narrative from starting in February 2020, Mario kept showing up at these scenes involving undercover officers and filming the undercover officers. Because of 1105, both because of that provision and other provisions in the bill, almost any interaction with the police in Georgia now can put you in ISIS crosshairs.
And it also seems like that also sets up a sort of like credible line of communication then between ICE and the county sheriff, that like there's a lot more potential collaboration that could be happening behind the scenes that is like
we have their
implied.
emails.
Yeah, like it's like they're talking to each other. They know what's going on.
Yeah, like I have the email where where ICE asked Gwinnett County, do you have any information that can help us fight Mario's bond?
I mean, it seems like Mario's up against a lot here.
I do want to flag that the charges against Mario in Gwinnett County were dropped due to a lack of evidence. I believe the solicitor's office said that it's clear that Mario was being given directions by multiple police officers and followed them to the best of his ability, multiple differing directions. And the Gwinnett County charges were also dropped due to a lack of evidence. So you run into the situation that is now extremely common in this country, where you have a person in immigration detention being accused, convicted, charged of no crime. Not that someone who is charged of a crime should be put in the hellhole that is immigration detention anymore. But yeah, I just want to highlight that Mario is not charged with any crime. And as much as Mario's case is exceptional now, in terms of how he's being treated as a journalist, that aspect of it is disturbingly, depressingly common.
Yeah, I think that's like kind of what is interesting about talking about this case in greater depth, because like there is this part that's like ICE exercising great prejudice against somebody who is a journalist, who is like covering issues that affect the community due to ICE's increased activity. And then there's also the other piece, which is how commonplace the sort of like linkage between county and local law enforcement and then ICE is, especially now. It's like, it's almost like the bringing those things together sort of like point up how dangerous exactly the like immigration enforcement regime that we're living under right now is. That's like, it's so ordinary for these kinds of things to be mobilized against somebody. And because Mario is this well-known journalist, it's like he is experiencing this like heightened scrutiny and like heightened threat from the state because of that thing. It's my sense that it's sort of like they're trying to make an example of him.
Yeah, I mean that's been playing. Mario himself has given a couple interviews over the phone from immigration detention, and he himself has said that. His lawyers have said that. There's so many things about Mario's case that are exceptional. For example, 2 of the traffic charges, by all accounts, the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Office did not witness him commit those alleged traffic violations in person. They looked at archived Facebook Live videos, saw him, allegedly use his phone while driving or allegedly run a red light, and took out the charges that way. I spoke with one criminal defense attorney who said that in his 12 years of practicing had never, ever, ever seen someone charged with a misdemeanor traffic offense because an officer said they saw the driver commit that offense on video. The way, like, Mario has been shuttled between 6 different both ICE detention facilities and local jails that contract out to ICE. There's been multiple points in his detainment where for hours, days, no one knew which facility he was in.
Yeah, it is absolutely like ghoulish stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for sharing your reporting with us and telling me more about some of the like windy details of this case.
I could go on for a really long time.
We'll put a link to your story in the Georgia Recorder from the end of last month in the show notes so people can really dig into some of this material if they're interested. And we appreciate you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys having me on to talk about the story.
Awesome. Well, take care, Sam. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Our thanks again to Sam Barnes for joining us. And again, you can find a link to their full reporting in the Georgia Recorder in the show notes. Speaking of the political violence against migrants, a lot of the discourse lately on what constitutes political violence is really focused on the random and frankly kind of horrific stochastic terrorism, like things that resulted in the death of Charlie Kirk earlier this week, or honestly to a much more small and bafflingly small degree in the mainstream media, the death of Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman back in June. But from the US-Mexico border to LA to the South Bronx, immigrants are very purposefully being used as pawns by the administration in a calculated effort to erode our civil liberties, consolidate power, and yes, normalize state violence. And that violence is escalating. My guest today is the International Associate General Secretary for the American Friends Service Committee, or AFSC, Kerri Kennedy. AFSC is a historic Philadelphia-based Quaker organization that's worked to hold the U.S. accountable to its unrealized promises of freedom and democracy for over a century. Kerri, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first of all, can you tell our listeners a little bit about the history of the AFSC, its work, and perhaps a little bit of your background and how you came to the organization?
Sure. So AFSC, as you said, is a Quaker peace and social justice organization. We are 107 years old. So we are a long established, complex global organization, and we try to dismantle systems of violence and oppression wherever we see them in the world. We were started after World War II, during World War II and throughout World War II, as a way for Americans to serve nonviolently, to serve their country nonviolently. So if you know Quakers are pacifists. We do not believe in violence. We believe in nonviolent movements. And we believe there is light or divine in each person. So that really informs the way that we operate. It informs all of our work. And I run our international division. We're in about 18 countries. We operate in 60 countries, and we're in some of the most difficult, authoritarian, repressive countries in the world. We work on building peace building and justice, human rights, and we do some small scale humanitarian assistance like we're currently doing in Gaza. So it's a wonderful organization. Do you want me to tell you a little bit about how I came to AFSC?
Yeah. What is your area of expertise, and how did you get involved with AFSC?
Yeah, so I'm a Catholic who has become Quaker-like, but I after college went into the Peace Corps. I have a big Irish Catholic family from New Jersey, 5 brothers, and 24 years ago on 9/11, after the Peace Corps, I was working in economic development, was on Wall Street. I was actually going to Rikers Island that day, on the day of September 11th, 2001, to do a training for youth who had been incarcerated. So I was working with youth who were incarcerated, and the prison locked down. We heard that the World Trade Center, Tower 1, the first tower to hit, was hit by a plane. And I was with a detective who drove us across the Brooklyn Bridge. And my twin brother, was on the 85th floor of the first tower that was hit. It was the second tower to fall. So as I'm rushing into Lower Manhattan, the building at that point had then collapsed, and you just see plumes of smoke and streams of people covered in soot. I saw the building collapse. And if anybody who was in Lower Manhattan at that time, phones were completely jammed up. Nobody could get through. So I didn't know if my brother was dead or alive. I didn't know where the plane had hit. And thankfully, thank God, I thought he did survive. And a lot of the news footage, you see him, he was a runner with the building collapsing and a plume of smoke kind of pushing him forward.
Wow.
But it was a really dramatic moment. And it was what I called like a lightning, you'll have these lightning bolts in your life. And that was a moment where I think, like, how could such a mass atrocity happen? How do humans create these acts of violence, political, ideological violence? How does that occur, and how do we interrupt it? So that led me to graduate school. And then I've been doing this work since. I actually ran a small nonprofit before I came to AFSC that focused on getting women in leadership after and during conflicts. We worked with women members of parliament in places like Afghanistan, Liberia, Timor-Leste. And I was introduced to AFSC, and that organization, it's WCI, was doing really, really good work. I felt like I was on the post-conflict side of conflict, traveling around the world, doing Truth and Reconciliation Commission work, hearing these horrible stories of conflict, genocide, authoritarianism, and felt like I wanted to be more on the preventative side. So I came to AFSC, and I've been here for 13 years.
Amazing. I mean, it really is sort of like an interesting confluence that, like, a lot of your origin story is about 9/11, and we're talking the day after the anniversary. I didn't plan this. This wasn't.
I know you didn't. We did not. Yeah.
Yeah. But it also strikes me that, like, and I've been thinking about this a lot, obviously, with the sort of like escalating surveillance and all this stuff of immigrant communities within the United States, that, like, so much of the post 9/11, like, we have to do this in the name of national security frankly bullshit that occurred has really been like memory hold for a lot of people. And like, I think some of that is obviously intentional on the part of like, the forces that manufacture consent for things like the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. But some of it is like, I think has kind of been swept under the rug. And I'm curious, like, over the past 24 years, how you've thought about that sort of like moment of rupture as something that has driven the trajectory that we've been on as a country, and how, especially as somebody who thinks about authoritarianism and state violence, like how you see that like longer arc playing out right now.
Yeah, it's a really important point for us to think about as a country, and it's a great question. So after 9/11, we saw extraordinary powers being used, and in authoritarian contexts, you will often see emergency power laws, right?
Mhm.
So if there's a natural disaster or if there's some kind of attack, presidents around the world will say, okay, for this period of time, we are going to do this thing that will restrict your civil liberties, but it will protect the good of the people. And that's so common. AFSC, we have a civil space tracker. You can go on our website and see, and we track where that happens. And people can argue whether that is good or bad, but it happens. It's legally bounded. But what happens is that once you normalize those extraordinary powers, there is very few mechanisms to remove them. And so after 9/11, we see there was the Patriot Act, and that started to name groups terrorist groups. Now, in Peacebuilding 101, you have to work with everybody. There's no such thing as not being able to engage with a group that's called a terrorist group, because you have to be able to bring all parties together to come to a conflict resolution, to discuss important critical crises, conflicts, and solutions. But the Patriot Act was very restrictive in terms of who you could engage with. There was material support acts. And in response to those conditions, we don't take US government money. So we didn't have those conditions on us for our program operations. But banks began to actively de-risk. So 24 years ago, from the Patriot Act was created, and then there is this active bank de-risking process, where what I call overcompliance. So the banks began to try to minimize their risk of being fined or being targeted by the administration or being charged in any way with any kind of terrorist supporting activity. They start to restrict the work that they do. We, for instance, at AFSC, did humanitarian work in North Korea. It was sanctioned. We followed humanitarian waivers. You had to follow all these protocols to do this work. You have to get permissions from the North Korean government, the US government, Department of State. But if a bank saw that you were doing any kind of humanitarian work in North Korea, they would just freeze your accounts, freeze a wire, ask a lot of questions. They could stop working with you if they thought that you were working in a place where there might be a lot of groups that are called terrorist groups in Somalia or in Palestine or in North Korea. So we see this over compliance starting 24 years ago. And I've been working at AFSC now for 13 years. It's gotten worse in the past 10 years. So it's just progressively, our mobility has gotten worse. It's harder for people, for our staff, for our partners to travel to the United States, to travel to other countries. So migration offices, banks, they're actively de-risking. We see today that's exactly, you see the examples of where universities or law firms, in response to executive orders that the Trump administration is putting out that are not legally binding, are over complying in advance. And that's really a sign that you're going towards authoritarian creep, and it's something we want to avoid 100%. I'll just give one more example on this. We saw just recently this year, we stopped taking our shoes off online at the airport. We started doing that more than 20 years ago because of a threat from one person. So you see this sustaining how something, a power or an act or something that is put in place after a crisis can just remain without oversight, without critical thought, and it can be very unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild to me, this list of things, and that, like, I think I also, I mean, this question about like who or what is a terrorist is like
Yeah.
obviously very live right now for a lot of people
Yeah.
too, because it's like, you know, even getting sort of basic aid into Gaza has become basically impossible with like any US based payment processor. Like it really is. It feels so normal now that like, yeah, like remembering this history and actually like contextualizing it in a longer arc of like, no, like we've been on this path for a lot longer than Donald Trump as candidate, Donald Trump as executive office holder. And that a lot of the tools, I mean, I think one of the things that your sort of like longer memory on this stuff makes me think about is like a lot of the tools have been put into place progressively over time. And that like the Trump administration right now, like the second Trump administration, is just willing to weaponize them in a different way against its political enemies.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, as a Quaker organization, we're going to say there's good or light in all people, and that people do, there are acts of political violence. So yes, people do commit acts of political violence. And what we're seeing in response to, I heard that the Charlie Kirk murder is this dehumanization, what we're seeing in the United States, which is playing right into the authoritarian playbook, is this othering or dehumanizing of your opposition, this dehumanizing of immigrants. So it starts to allow people who might not be able to harm or condemn their neighbor to condemn somebody who doesn't look like them or who doesn't sound like them. And that is the first thing that we have to interrupt. We saw all over social media, people, I heard you saying this earlier, people coming out and just attacking without knowledge, without facts, without any evidence, scapegoating whole groups of people who they thought may or may not be responsible for this horrible murder. But the fact that we can think, well, this group of people, and it's being exacerbated by Donald Trump, this whole group of people is immoral and evil and not human. And that enables other groups to commit crimes against them, to condemn them to alligator Alcatraz, to not bat an eye when you see children or women being pulled out of cars where masked men are breaking down windows and pulling them out without warrants, without identifying information, without following the laws that we have in place so that people can be as safe as possible if they are being deported. Because we know deportation has happened under all administrations. It happened under the Obama administration, under the Biden administration. So it's not unique to Trump. But what is unique is the inhumanity of it, the callousness, the cruelty, the fast pace, the escalation. So the taking the ICE budget, which was 8 to 9 billion, ramping that up in the big beautiful bill to 170 billion, and then scaling that staffing. You can lose control over that. You can bring in vigilantism, so that the scaling, the cruelty, the callousness, the rapid fireness of it is so that you can't stop it in the moment. You have to wait for the courts to catch up, to somehow interrupt a flight that's being deported to Costa Rica or to El Salvador. So we have to find a way to stop that dehumanization for us to really interrupt this authoritarian creep.
Yeah, well, and it strikes me too that like one of the things that I've been thinking, one of the things that I've seen recently that I can't unsee is the video of that drone strike on that speedboat that was supposedly in Venezuela. That I'm just like, cool, the US Navy is just going to attack random watercraft that's like, when you read the headline, the way that it was headlined in the mainstream media was like, a boat leaving this country that like we're worried about drug trafficking, whatever. And it was just like, that's like a speedboat that like you just see at like any marina. Like it was like nothing, right? Like
yeah.
and that was a blip, right? Like
Yeah.
we're like, cool, we do that now. And I think there's so much of what you're saying about this dehumanization and like othering of migrants, this like idea that like there are these criminal elements that we have to stop at all costs, that are like really like corrosive to also, it's not like, not just what the government does is what I'm hearing you saying, it's also like how we as the public relate to those things.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, on the Venezuela, the fact that there was very little information. They're saying that it was filled with narco terrorists. Well, by whose verification? By whose information?
Yeah, and what does that word even mean?
Right. So this acting and killing without following international law is really scary. It's taking us to rogue nation territory. We're seeing it in the Middle East. We saw Israel attack mediators in Doha. So people who were supported by the United States, we sanctioned them being there to mediate on our behalf for an end to the genocide in Palestine and to find some way for us to end this horror show that is occurring in Gaza. And they were killed. These mediators were killed. So this rogue, the Venezuelans, 11 were killed. This rogue state takes us into territory where nobody's safe. And I hope that this becomes a moment where all Americans realize, we've seen this in history in the Holocaust. We have to interrupt this. We have to stand in our power with each other wherever we can, because, okay, you can say they scapegoat the immigrants now to say, well, they broke the law, so they should be taken out on a plane. Well, it's going to be somebody who protested against something next that you didn't agree with, and then so on and so on and so on. So it's the way that it's the cruelty, it's the lack of due process. And, Kaden, we know that law is not always morality.
Right.
Slavery was legal for a very long time. So we have to figure out ways as movements, as leaders, as activists, as peace builders, to figure out how do we do strategic non-cooperation? How do we do compliance minimalism? How do we interrupt what we think is unjust and denies people their human rights at every turn?
Yeah, well, let's get into a little bit of that. Like, I think that the way in which one of the things I love about the long history is that we can kind of like track the arc. One of the things that I think is sometimes the trouble with the long history is people are like, oh no, like it's been going on for so long. How do we interrupt it?
It's true.
What are some of the things that you all are working on that are like help people take action around this? And like, what are some of the prescriptions that you've identified?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for asking that. So there's one on migration. We do have this campaign that's called Stronger with Immigrants, and you can go on our website and you can take actions to support people in your community. So we have Know Your Rights trainings. We have ways that you can connect up with different movements in the places that you live. We support people who are deported outside of the United States. So we have a regional office in Costa Rica, and we work in Guatemala, Mexico, and El Salvador. Our regional director is a human rights lawyer, and she's worked. The Costa Rica case is very quiet, but a plane was brought to Costa Rica of people that were deported to Costa Rica from Russia, Afghanistan, and Armenia, and other countries. So they were just dropped there and said, okay, you're now going to be, you're going to have through our office, we work to make sure that they could get asylum. So they can get asylum in Costa Rica, but what were they deported for? Why were they deported to a random country that is nothing to do with them? They don't speak the language. Yeah. So you can join us on our website. You could find ways to advocate. You can find ways to learn more about what's happening, to get involved. There's the campaign that we have, Stronger with immigration. We're trying to get 100,000 actions. And I think to date, we've gotten 61,000 actions. So it's a good way for you, wherever you are, to come in, get involved, see what's happening, see that how you can connect and support. So that's one way. Another way is, we really are looking at tracking this authoritarian creep and learning from history, learning from what works overseas. And we're calling for organizations to take collective action. One thing that we know from our work doing peace building and human rights work in many countries, in Burundi and Somalia and Costa Rica, in North Korea, is that because we work in a lot of authoritarian contexts, and what happens with INGOs in authoritarian contexts is that you band together really quickly to address something that might be a violation of staff's privacy or of human rights. And so it is this ingrained in international peace building, anti-authoritarian work way of really quickly collectively organizing. And we're seeing that in the United States. What we are also seeing is kind of fear, because it's so it seems so new. The level of repression that we're seeing here seems really new and really scary to a lot of people. And it is fairly new. I think that the degree with which the repression has come and the onslaught of executive orders, which are criminalizing activism, civic participation, civic space, is new. And authoritarianism can only happen when people are silent and afraid. So we are constantly looking to engage people on actions, big or small, connecting to doing a vigil, connecting with your elected officials, connecting with the church, connecting with your local movement, or movements around issues that you care about, and standing up and taking action. Because I don't know if you know, are you familiar with the research of Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan?
Totally.
Yeah. So, right, it's the 3%. I think that a lot of this has been said a lot, but it's this, they've studied, Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan, who are researchers, great researchers in the space. They studied 100 years of regime change. And they found in their research that it takes approximately 3% of an engaged population to change a regime non-violently. And
it requires the sustained engagement of that 3.5. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's not just go to one protest and then leave. You have to continue. We have to realize that if we want to fight for the heart and the ideals of our country, it's going to take us to show up. It's going to take us to engage in the long term. It's going to take us, to let it, we're going to have to take breaks and come back in. But this is this long arc of change. And it's going to take all of us to do as much interruption as possible in whatever space that you are in. I know I'm speaking to the choir in this group, in the magazine, but yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I'm thinking about too is like going back to the things that you were saying about like banks de-risking after 9/11 around quote unquote terrorism, is like, I wonder, and I just recently saw Deborah Barron again, but friend of the pod, Deborah Barron, who runs the New Left Accelerator. She was on the pod, honestly, at this point, over a year ago, talking about risk and how we within movements talk about risk. And it strikes me that like we have perhaps, unfortunately, inherited some of that de-risking behavior from the like financial and legal sector without even really knowing it. And that like our assessment of what is risky is sometimes like inaccurate. It might be like over-indexed towards the risk in terms of like we're overthinking the thing that is dangerous for us. But the thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately, really in the past, basically since January, is the thing that Deb said on the pod, which is, what is the risk of not taking action?
Exactly.
And like, we don't have like good tools to like orient towards that risk. And what I kind of hear you saying is like, the thing that we need to recalibrate as we're thinking about state violence is like, what are the risks of inaction as opposed to the risk of action?
Completely agree on your point about inherited kind of de-risking and on that calculation, because we're finding in spaces, in activism spaces, in peace building spaces, in donor spaces, in NGO or civil society spaces, that there's a lot more legal influence, and there's a lot more legal counsel that's getting involved about, like, okay, because people want to sustain their mission.
Yeah, reasonable.
And right, reasonable. But I think, I think there is, there is this, there is not a real understanding, I think, yet about, first, how quickly authoritarianism happens. I think there is this sense, when you haven't been in it or working in it, or that you'll see the tanks in the street, and it's going to be like the Tiananmen Square kind of, that's going to be it. You're going to see this show of military, but it is the erosion of laws and norms. It's removing civil servants and replacing them with loyalists. It is cracking down on protest and dissent. It is criminalizing behavior or not following your own legal laws or due processes. It's standing outside the court systems where somebody that's going for their asylum case and taking them and deporting them anyway, even though they're in a US legal process. So it is all of these erosions that happen so slowly. And I talk to our leader, people, and I talk to a lot of donors to say, we're in the creep already.
Yeah.
And it can get really bad really quickly, because we've already started this slow move, and it's going to look different than you think. But if we do not do anything, it's going to get worse. But we have power. This is the thing. Like, we know from the research, we know from the legal cases where things have been interrupted. We know from, we see, it's funny that Harvard is now like the champion. The champion,
strange bedfellows,
underdog. But we saw how Harvard responded. Like, we have to take the privilege that we have, and we have to take more risk, and we have to put ourselves on the line, or else we're not going to have a democracy.
Yeah. And that, like, I think it is really interesting to see different institutions and organizations being like, yeah, this is like actually now acceptable risk for us to like stick our necks out, and who's not, right? Like, a lot of people are not. And actually, I mean, I think too that this sort of like redemption arc for Charlie Kirk is an interesting example too, where like you're seeing people at like state government levels also sort of like following Trump's lead around being like, we're going to use state resources to like mourn this guy who's basically I'm a podcaster. We're all assholes, whatever. But like, also I'm seeing on social media institutions being like, no, like, this is actually inconsistent with our values. Like, we're individual. Like, I just saw a post from the University of Michigan being like, we're not doing this. Like, if individual professors have this perspective, that's their academic freedom, whatever, they can do that. But like, as an institution, we're not lowering our flags to half-mast for like, this person that we don't have a relationship with, and it's like stuff like that like seems small and trivial, but is like part of that, like, no, we don't accept normalizing this. This is not, we're not interested in caping for the redemption arc of this person who has arguably caused a heck of a lot of harm.
Yeah. I mean, and that is like, the small things matter, right? When you have authoritarian creep, the small moments of interruption matter. I was talking to a friend about this, and she brought up this really interesting analogy that I thought was useful, and thinking about it. So, like the Sound of Music, right? And you think like the nuns, the role the nuns played. And so everyone in this has a different role. You can interrupt quietly. You can put obstacles. If you are given some kind of instruction, executive order that's not legally binding, that you don't want to follow, you can actively resist. So there's so many ways, and it's up to, I think, all of the different movement leaders to decide how, where their space is, what is right for them. Like, are they going to, are they going to not respond? Are they going to be quiet? Are they going to interrupt? Are they going to be loudly resistant? And there is risk with all of it. Like, if you're like super loud and resisting, you might be targeted more, but there's some kind of protection also in taking this really bold public stance and then you might have more people come and join you. So, it's been in authoritarian work overseas and in the United States. We constantly are saying, resist, do compliance minimalism. If you have to comply because there's a law, do it in the most minimal way possible. Like, don't answer
Don't do the work for them.
with one line. Don't do anything extra. Try avoid getting arrested if you must, if you want to, if you need to, for whatever reasons. It's your own personal organizational calculation, but just answer with no extra information. Don't ever give more than is asked for, or do strategic non-cooperation, and do not answer, interrupt, resist, get in the way, push back. And it's up to every movement, organization, and leader to decide what's right for them. But you have to do some, what we're seeing is over compliance. It's the exact opposite of what we need in the moment.
Yeah, no, that's
and really, that's not across the board. I don't want to generalize because there's many people doing really, but like you see the banks, the law firms, the universities, you are seeing in the nonprofit sector and in the movement sector, you are not seeing over compliance in large, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, it also strikes me that a lot of times when we're talking about over compliance, we are talking about organizations that are like large and actually have a lot of resources to fight. And I think that's like the most frustrating thing to me personally, is like watching like a university with a huge endowment kiss the ring, being like, I know, you guys have the resources to fight this thing.
And they're going after the donors. So they're going over the donors who fund the spaces. So the big foundations that are progressive, and I'm speaking a lot in those spaces to say, you have privilege, you have power. Like, it's up to you to say this. You have whatever this foundation has $100 billion endowment. You can fight this.
Yeah, if you have more money than God, what are you doing?
Yeah, you don't have to take that, or you don't have to worry about the risk. Like, take the risk, and that leads the way. Like, the Harvard leads the way for the smaller organizations or universities that don't have the endowment and can't do it. It's incumbent on the most privileged at this moment to stand in the way.
Yeah, and I think that in that also, like, I see so many people trying to figure out also, how do I relate to those institutions? Because it's like alumni of these colleges walk among us, right? It's like we as individuals then can create pressure from below to get those institutions to behave in ways that are consistent with what we need them to be doing.
Exactly. I mean, I have kids, teenagers who are going to be going to college too, and it's like you're voting or following the universities whose values align with you. Like, are we going to spend money somewhere that is repressing free speech, repressing? I'm not going to send my child somewhere where they're sending in police to crack down on protests. That is the university experience. That's our American right to protest.
Well, and what does that say for like the quality of instruction, like the kinds of perspectives that you're going to encounter in the classroom? Like, if that's the threat, if the threat is we're going to beat you up, we're going to use cops with batons to beat you up for protesting a genocide, like, what's the quality of instruction you're going to receive?
It's not the thinkers that I want my children to learn from.
Yeah, for real. Is there anything else that you would add about sort of like opportunities, especially thinking about, I think a lot of people think about the immigration system as this like big and sort of impersonal thing. But the reality is so much is localized, right? Like that's what we're seeing in the sort of like, free DC, like night patrols and stuff like that. Like regular ass people in the places where they are doing the thing. Are there other things that you can point to specifically around immigration? Because I think that there is that disconnect that I think a lot of people see.
I love the way people are showing up to protect their neighbors and their communities. I mean, that has to be like the inspiring, like that's the thing that gives us hope in this moment, right? Like, you see people that with megaphones who are going around communities telling people what their rights are. I saw one group in DC where there was an ICE raid like on a block, and you had blockades of activists and neighbors and friends on both sides of the block, stopping traffic and sending them in both directions. So there's actions like that. There's ICE surveillance trackers where you can go online and find groups that are telling people where to go. So you can tell your neighbor if you know what's happening. You can interrupt wherever you can. You can join protests. I mean, it does really take everyone showing up in ways small and large. So, I had my people in my family who are not activists, who are now wanting to go to the No Kings rally and show up and see what they can do. So I would, you encourage everybody in your community, in your family, to take the step to join a protest. We see, if you're with a religious group, I love the fact that popes and cardinals and priests are going to courts and just standing outside and bearing witness. That's something that you can do if you're a member of a church. You can ask your church leadership to do that as well. And that's like a really meaningful way to show up for our neighbors. We know if you look at our, as I mentioned, our Stronger with Immigration materials, you can print out a sign saying that you stand with immigrations and put on immigrants and immigration, just immigration policies and humane processes. You can put a sign on your lawn. So there's so many things to do. And I would just say, take one step. You don't have to. A lot of people sometimes, especially if they're new to the movement space, worry that they're not going to get it right. So they might not join, right? Because they're worried that they're not going to be perfect. They might say the wrong thing. And so we as movement leaders and we as peace builders and we as activists need to embrace everybody, no matter where they are, and bring more people in. And the people that are joining for the first time, just come, show up, put up a sign, go to a protest, call your elected official, show up outside their door. They are getting so many phone calls that
they should.
Yeah, and they can't deny it. So, just do anything you can to show up with your values and to say, I remember, I'm old, I'm like 50. And when I was young, when I was going in elementary school, we talked about the beauty of America was our melting pot, was the melting pot of America. Migrants, immigration, we all come from somewhere. And, let's not talk about genocidal history for Native Americans. That's a whole nother podcast. But this idea that we are stronger because we are this fabric of peoples who from all over the world who believe in these idyllic ideals of America, that narrative has completely disappeared. So if you believe in that melting pot, if you believe that we're stronger, that immigration makes us stronger and better, show up for it in whatever way you can.
Yeah, no, and I think the thing that you were saying about like, where is your community already? Like your family, your church, your board game group, whatever it might be, like start where you are. That like, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to start a new organization. You can, like, you shouldn't like.
Yeah, that's right. Because I have I've been doing this work for 25 years. I have my movement groups and my authoritarian groups and my international groups. I have my colleagues and my friends. I also have my mom groups in my area that like are totally disconnected from this and are not much more informed because of the work that I do, because I talk about it and I talk about ways they can show up. And I try not to demonize. I don't demonize. I humanize wherever they are and try to bring them along to what they care about and what they can do in small baby steps. And I hope we can all do a little bit more of that, so that we can have this, we can actually try to fulfill this vision of America that is an ideal that we can keep reaching for.
Yeah. And that's organizing. Like
exactly.
That's organizing.
That's right. That's right. Exactly right.
Well, Kerri, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to talk to you, learn a little bit more about your work and do some of this like deep thinking about what political violence looks like. That isn't just this sort of like dramatized interpersonal thing. I think it's really valuable.
Kaden, it was great to talk to you. It was a real pleasure. And look at our website, reach out to me. And if there's any ways that you want to connect, we're always looking for collective action, for ways to work with others, because that is, that's the path. So thanks. I really appreciate it today.
Amazing. Take care.
Okay. Thank you.
My thanks again to Kerri Kennedy of the American Friends Service Committee. There'll be links to connect with her work in the show notes for those of you who are interested in getting involved in their work. This show is published by Convergence, a magazine for radical insights. I'm Caden Mock, and our producer is Josh Elstro. Kimmy David designed our cover art. If you have something to say, please do drop me a line. You can send me an email that we'll consider running on an upcoming mailbag episode at mailbag@convergencemag.com. And of course, if you would like to support this work, the work that we do to bring our movements together, to strategize, struggle, and win in this crucial historical moment, you can become a member at convergencemag.com/donate. Even a few bucks a month goes a really long way to making sure that our independent small team can continue to build a map for our movements. I hope this helps.